I sat in the lawyer's office thinking this was just a formality until the will was read aloud. My parents left my brother $10 million. And me, a letter, a lie, a betrayal. But they had no idea who I'd become. I always thought the most dramatic moments in life were saved for movies or books, the kinds of scenes where you feel like the air is sucked out of the room, and all you can hear is your own heartbeat thundering in your ears. But that moment came for me at a long, dark mahogany table in my parents' lawyer's office. That was the day I stopped being their daughter. The day my brother became $10 million richer. And the day I realized I had been lied to my entire life. My name is Clara Preston, and this is the story of how I turned betrayal into power, how I rebuilt everything they tried to take from me and more. It starts at a will reading. But trust me, it ends in a way nobody saw coming. The chairs were stiff. The kind that forced you to sit upright, shoulders back, like a good little girl waiting to be dismissed. I sat across from my older brother, Ethan, who looked like he belonged in a Forbes magazine cover, crisp navy suit, expensive watch gleaming, that arrogant little smirk tugging at his lips. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since the incident at Christmas dinner. Not since I told him I was done playing the good daughter while he got away with everything. Our family lawyer, Mr. Halverson, sat at the head of the table. Old, gruff, meticulous, just like my father liked his people. He cleared his throat. As executors of the estate of Jonathan and Margaret Preston, I will now begin reading the final will and testament. I remember how my stomach clenched. Like it knew what was coming, the reading began predictably enough. Formalities, legal language. Then came the division of assets. To our beloved son, Ethan Preston, we leave the family estate in Westbridge Hills, the business shares in Preston Industrial Holdings, and the financial portfolio totaling $10 million in liquid and real assets. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just waited for the next part. Surely there was more. Surely Mr. Halverson looked up and cleared his throat again. To our daughter Clara Preston, we live a sealed letter. My mouth went dry, and our heartfelt wish that she finds peace and purpose, even if our choices are misunderstood. That was it, a letter. Not a cent. Not a single piece of furniture. Not even a trinket from Mom's jewelry box. I felt every eye in the room pivot to me, some curious, some pitying. Ethan didn't even try to hide the smug look on his face. Well, he said, shifting back in his seat, I guess they knew who was really worthy of carrying on the Preston legacy. It was like being slapped, but without the sound. Just shame, hot and thick, rising up my throat. I clenched the envelope the lawyer slid across the table. It was heavy creamstock paper. My mother's delicate cursive on the front. To Clara, with love. I didn't open it. Not then. I just stood, nodded once at Mr. Halverson, and walked out. Outside, the late spring sun hit me like a spotlight. Everything was too bright, too loud. People bustled around the city like the world hadn't just shattered beneath my feet. My brother caught up with me on the steps. Don't take it personally, Clara. You were always the dreamer. Mom and Dad. They needed someone practical. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not with the scream building in my chest. He shrugged and walked off, climbing into the back of a sleek black town car, and me. I walked and walked until I found myself sitting on a park bench, surrounded by couples pushing strollers, joggers with earbuds, students with iced coffees. And then I opened the envelope. Inside was a single, folded letter. One sentence. You'll understand one day. That was it. No signature. No explanation. No comfort. just a sentence that felt like a riddle, and a slap in the face. I should have cried. I wanted to. But the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt something else rising in my chest. Something unfamiliar. Fire. They had taken everything from me. Again. But they had no idea who I had become while they weren't looking. I wasn't the quiet, obedient little Clara anymore. I was going to find out the truth behind this letter. And when I did, they were all going to understand exactly who I was. I kept the letter in a drawer for 3 days. 3 days of pacing my apartment, avoiding calls, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering what in the world my parents meant by "you'll understand." One day, I didn't understand. I didn't understand anything. Why had they erased me from their lives? Why had they rewarded Ethan the golden boy, the screw-up turned CEO, and left me, their daughter, with a riddle and no answers? I kept hearing my mother's voice from years ago. "We're doing what's best for you, Clara. You'll see that one day." She used to say that every time I questioned why Ethan was allowed to go to private schools, get brand new cars, and disappear for weeks without explanation, while I worked to part-time jobs to afford textbooks, I thought she was being protective, maybe even practical. But now I realized she was hiding something. On the 4th day, I went to the attic. My apartment was a rented walk-up in an old building that creaked in the wind, but the attic was dry and held my few boxes from childhood. I pulled out the one marked MOM plus Dad. Inside, my baby book with pages torn out, a faded Christmas card from 2003, a broken locket that used to hold their wedding photo, and a thick envelope labeled "private" in my father's handwriting. He hesitated. My pulse thudded against my ribcage. My parents weren't exactly the emotional type, so for my father to leave something marked "private" meant it was either deeply important or deeply buried. I opened it. Inside were tax forms, dozens of them, going back almost 15 years. Names, accounts, signatures, my signature. Only, I didn't remember signing anything "T first. It didn't make sense. I was just a teenager then. Why would I be listed on company loans? Credit documents. Then I saw it. A student loan application in my name for 120,000. But I never took out a student loan. I went to state school on scholarship. I was careful with my money. Always. I flipped through more. A business bailout loan signed under a minor's name, mine, and a final page. A notarized affidavit from my father, dated when I was 17, in the event of audit, documentation to support the emergency transfer of ownership to Clara Preston shall be provided. She will not be notified unless legally required. I froze. They used my identity. They took my name, my trust, and my clean record, and used it as a shield to save themselves and Ethan's failing startup. And then they had the audacity to leave me with a letter that said, "You'll understand one day." I understood now. I understood they hadn't just betrayed me at the will reading, they had betrayed me my entire life. The rage didn't come all at once. It leaked in through the cracks. When I looked at the apartment I could barely afford because I chose to live honestly, when I remembered the day I got denied for a car loan, thinking it was a mistake, when I saw that my credit score, my future, was damaged years ago. Before I even knew what credit was, I sat in my kitchen that night with all the paperwork spread across the table. I stared at every forged signature, every page of fine print. Then I called the one person I hadn't spoken to since grad school. Lena. She was my roommate once. Now, a financial investigator for a private firm. "Clara," she said when she answered. "Wow. It's been forever. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need a favor. The next week was a blur. Lena came over and helped me piece together the financial puzzle. Clara, this isn't just identity theft, she said after the third pot of coffee. This was orchestrated. They didn't just take your name. They built a second life on it. She pulled up court records, traced offshore accounts, even found a paper trail to a shell company. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward me. This trust, it's under your name, but it's hidden offshore, set to unlock on your 30th birthday. What's in it? I asked. She clicked a few more times. Approximately 12 million. I blinked. What? I whispered. $12 million, she said, slowly. And it was created by your father. 10 years ago. I couldn't speak. My hands trembled. Why wouldn't they tell me? I asked out loud. Lena looked at me carefully. Because they were scared. That money was meant for you. But if you found it, you'd have control, power. You'd become a threat to their plans. I stared at the screen. They'd left me out of the will because they thought I already had everything, and yet they never planned for me to discover it. They just wanted to erase me quietly, tie up loose ends, and keep Ethan as their legacy. But they miscalculated, because now I had everything: proof, records, the trust, and a fire inside me hotter than ever. I was going to reclaim what they stole, but I wasn't going to do it with screams or lawsuits. No, I was going to do it in silence. Let them think they won. Let them believe I was the weak one, while I rebuilt myself and prepared for the moment they'd realize the daughter they erased was the one holding all the cards. I used to believe that justice was about fairness, that if you did the right thing long enough, good things would follow. But now I know better. Justice isn't handed out, it's claimed. And I was done waiting for someone to hand it to me, Lena. And I spent the next 2 weeks building a silent war machine. We created digital backups of every document, watermarked and time-stamped. She helped me lock down access to the trust fund, ensuring no one else could tamper with it. Legally, the money was mine. My name was everywhere. But morally, I needed more than a payout. I needed truth. There was still a question echoing through my mind. Why the silence? Why the secrecy? What were they trying to protect? I started small, visiting old contacts from my dad's company, Preston Industrial Holdings. Most were polite. A few were wary, but one man, Harold Dreller, Dad's former CFO, hesitated when I asked about the financial crisis 10 years ago. That was a rough time, he said, sipping his coffee. Your father had to make tough calls. Did those calls involve putting me on fraudulent documents? I asked calmly. He froze. His eyes flicked to mine, and just like that he knew I knew. I didn't know you were involved until it was done, he murmured. I told Jonathan it was risky. But he said you were smart, that you'd bounce back one day. I blinked. He said that? Harold gave a small, sad smile. He always underestimated you. That's why he was afraid of you. Afraid. It shook me. All these years I thought I was invisible to them. But maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was too visible, too independent. A reminder that they didn't own me, and that scared them more than anything. I kept digging. My mother's old storage unit still had her boxes of records painstakingly labeled in her neat, cursive handwriting. I found her journal. Not just one entry, an entire book. Years of thoughts, emotions, regrets she never said out loud. And in one entry, dated 3 months before her death, I found this. If Clara ever reads this, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to protect you without betraying your father. He made choices I couldn't undo. But I tried, in my own way. The trust was the only thing I could leave you without his interference. I hope it finds you. I read it 5 times. 10. She tried. Maybe not enough. Maybe not the right way. But she tried, and still, she stayed silent. Ethan, on the other hand, he wasn't silent. A week after the will reading, his voice found its way into my voicemail. Clara, I heard you've been sniffing around Dad's old contacts. I don't know what you think you're going to find, but seriously, give it a rest. You got what you were meant to get. I played it again and again. Let the arrogance drip into my bones. He still didn't know. He didn't know about the trust, or the journal, or the evidence. He thought I was just curious, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I needed time. Strategy. A way to strike without alerting him. As I disappeared for a while, I quit my teaching job, something I thought I'd never do. But honestly, after everything, I couldn't sit in front of a chalkboard pretending fractions mattered when my entire life had been divided into lies. Instead, I took a small office space. Just a desk, a laptop, and whiteboards on every wall. Lena helped me design a plan. We called it Operation Glass House because I was about to throw a stone so precise it would shatter Ethan's world into pieces. Step 1. Public pressure. Lena connected me with a financial podcast that interviewed whistleblowers anonymously. I told my story without names, just facts. It blew up. Emails flooded in. People who'd also been erased by powerful families. Daughters disinherited. Sons betrayed. Women like me who were tired of being silenced. The podcast titled it The Ghost Beneficiary. It trended for days, and that's when Ethan called again. Clara, he said, voice cold. You think you're smart. You think a little attention is going to undo everything I've built? I didn't flinch. I'm not trying to undo what you built. I'm just finally building mine. He laughed bitterly. You were always dramatic. Maybe, I said. But I have one thing you never will. Oh, what's that? Evidence. The line went dead. Step 2. Legal leverage. We submitted documentation to a compliance board, one of many Lena had worked with over the years. They flagged Preston Industrial Holdings for an internal audit. Ethan's empire started sweating. It wasn't enough to destroy him, not yet. But it shook him, and it reminded him I wasn't going away. Meanwhile, I opened a charity foundation with the early release of funds from my trust, focused on supporting young women who'd been financially manipulated or disowned. I called it Second Light, and when the first scholarship went out to a girl whose parents cut her off after she refused an arranged marriage, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. They thought they buried me, but I was growing. In the shadows, in silence, in fire, and I was about to rise taller than they ever imagined. My parents always preached about appearances. Keep your head high, smile, even when it hurts. Never let the world know what's going on behind closed doors, and I obeyed for a long time. Until I realized silence was just another weapon they used against me. Now, I wasn't silent anymore, but I wasn't screaming either. I was orchestrating. The morning Forbes Daily reached out. I nearly dropped my coffee. They'd heard the anonymous podcast, the one where I told my story without naming names, but something about the way I described a family business built on deception and a daughter erased from her own birthright had caught their attention. They wanted an exclusive on me, not the scandal, not the trust, not Ethan. Me, I said yes, but under one condition. They wouldn't publish anything without my final approval. The interview took place in a quiet loft downtown. No big cameras. Just one journalist, a notebook and a microphone. Her name was Nadine. Sharp, elegant, and surprisingly kind. "Tell me what your life was like before the will reading," she asked gently. I hesitated, because how do you describe a life where you're constantly present, but never seen? I was the background noise, I said finally. The daughter who didn't ask for much. The one who always stepped aside when Ethan needed the spotlight. "And why did you stop?" I smiled softly. "Because eventually you realize the spotlight doesn't define your worth. The truth does." After the interview, I sat alone in my car for a long time. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was ready for whatever came next, for whatever Ethan tried to throw at me. And oh, he did. 3 days later, I received a legal threat from Preston Holdings, accusation of defamation, claiming I was actively damaging the reputation and market stability of a respected family business. I laughed. The letter was toothless, empty threats dressed in formal legalese, but it confirmed something important. I was getting under his skin, and then the cracks started showing. One of Ethan's board members resigned quietly. No press release. Another leaked email surfaced on a financial news blog, an internal memo warning of inconsistencies in legacy documentation. The company's stock dipped, just slightly, but enough for the vultures to circle. Ethan must have felt the walls tightening, because that's when he did the unthinkable. He showed up at my office. It was surreal seeing him there. Ethan, the polished CEO, standing in the doorway of my modest workspace, like he didn't belong to a different universe. He looked tired, tense, not at all like the man at the will reading. "I'm not here to fight," he said, holding his hands up. "Then leave," I said without looking up. But he didn't. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "Clara," he said, "what do you want?" It was such a strange question. What do I want? I echoed. I wanted a family. I wanted honesty. I wanted parents who didn't use my identity to commit fraud and then pretend I didn't exist. He flinched, just slightly. "And now?" he asked. I stood. "Now, I want what's mine. And I want to make sure no one like me ever has to stay quiet again." He stared at me for a long time. Then he did something I didn't expect. He sat down and told me the truth. I didn't know everything, he said. "I swear, Clara, I knew Dad moved things around. I knew they were hiding money. But I didn't know they used your name until after it was done." I didn't believe him, but I let him talk. "They always said you were too emotional, that you couldn't handle business. But I knew the truth. You were the smart one, the quiet threat." I narrowed my eyes. "So you were jealous." He didn't deny it. I didn't want to lose everything. And when they gave me that inheritance, I told myself it was because I earned it. "And you believe that?" I asked. "No," he whispered. "Not anymore." There was a long silence. I looked at him, my brother, the golden child, the man who had everything handed to him while I was left to fight for scraps. I should felt satisfaction seeing him like this, but I didn't. I just felt tired. "You'll be fine," I said finally. "You'll spin your way out of this. You always do. But you won't stop, will you?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not until the truth is louder than the lies." He stood slowly, defeated. Before he left, he turned back. "Clara, if MOM were alive, I think she'd be proud of you." I didn't respond, because the truth was, I wasn't doing this for mom, or dad, or even for Ethan. I was doing it for the girl they tried to erase. The girl I used to be. I used to think confronting the villain would feel like the end of the story. But life isn't like that. There's no swelling music, no dramatic applause. Sometimes the villain cries. Sometimes they admit things. And sometimes they walk away, quietly leaving you alone with everything they destroyed. Ethan's visit lingered in my head longer than I wanted. Not because I believed him, but because a part of me still craved something I shouldn't. Validation. That maybe, somewhere beneath all the greed and favoritism, my family had once cared about me. But hope like that is a trap, and I'd stepped in it too many times before. I buried myself in work at Second Light. Our second wave of grants launched for girls aging out of foster care. I gave a talk at a local college on financial literacy and independence for women. It went viral, more than 1 million views, thousands of comments, but one comment stood out. I was disinherited too. Thank you for making me feel seen. That was it. That was the mission. Not revenge, restoration. I was building something real, and the louder my work became, the more Ethan's empire began to shake. 2 weeks after his visit, an anonymous whistleblower published a bombshell article. It exposed Preston Holdings' history of using borrowed identities to funnel money during its early growth. I didn't write it. I didn't even know it was coming, but I knew who the source was. Harold, Dad's old CFO. He'd finally snapped. And he handed the entire truth to the press: names, documents, transfers, timelines, and my name. Right there in the opening paragraph. Not as a suspect, but as a victim. The fallout was swift. Ethan's board held an emergency vote. He was suspended. Shareholders began pulling out. Regulators launched an official investigation. And just like that, the $10 million kingdom he inherited began to crumble like ash in the wind. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because even as everything unraveled around him, I still remembered the little girl who once held his hand on the first day of school. Before the money, before the power, before the lie. I visited Mom and Dad's grave the next morning. I hadn't been since the funeral. It felt strange standing over marble carved with their names, knowing how little they had valued mine. I brought the letter they left me, the one that said, "You'll understand one day." I burned it, right there in the cold wind. I lit a match and watched the flames eat the page. "I do understand," I whispered. "You were cowards." But I wasn't. I walked away from that grave lighter than I'd felt in years. I had no parents, no inheritance, no place in the Preston legacy, and yet I had everything they never gave me, myself. When Forbes released my story, it shattered the internet. Not just because of the scandal, but because I didn't play the victim. I told the world the truth about being used, erased, lied to, and still rising anyway. I was invited to speak at a women's summit in Chicago, then another in New York, then globally. Clips of my story, my real story, circulated online with one title: "She was left out of the will, so she built an empire of her own." And for the first time in my life, I was known, not as Ethan's sister, not as Jonathan Preston's daughter, just as Clara. People started writing to me, thousands of them. Women, men, even teenagers. My family never saw me either. I always thought I was the problem. You gave me the courage to speak. That's when I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. Every person who'd ever been silenced, passed over, dismissed. I was just the voice, and I wasn't going to stop using it. But then, just when I thought the past had finally loosened its grip on me, a letter arrived at my office, hand-delivered, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's, but he was dead. I stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside was one page, one final truth, and it changed everything. The envelope was real. The paper smelled like dust and cedar, the kind that came from my father's private desk. It had been sealed carefully, likely meant to be delivered only if things fell apart. Inside was a single letter, no date, no greeting, just a truth, and it wrecked me. If you're reading this, Clara, then the truth is already cracking open. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope for understanding. The inheritance, your exclusion, was never about money. It was about protection. You were never meant to know what Ethan became. I stopped reading. My hands trembled. This wasn't some empty apology. It was a confession. Dad continued. When Ethan was 16, he hacked into my accounts. I didn't tell you or the board. Instead, I made a deal with him. I'd cover it up, bury it, and he'd walk the straight line. He didn't. He got better at hiding. He used your identity, Clara, to open those early offshore accounts. I found out 2 years later. It was already too late. My breath caught. Oh, it was true. The rumors, the whispers in the financial circles, all that time. The foundation of Preston Holdings was built on fraud using my name. I wasn't erased from the will out of malice. I was erased to distance me from a crime. To save the family name, to protect the empire, to protect him. I thought if we gave him everything, he'd grow into the man we hoped he could be. But you never needed to be bought, Clara. You were whole from the start. We failed you, and we knew it. We just didn't have the courage to face you and say, "We're sorry." There it was, the cowardice, the silence, the lie, not because they didn't love me, but because they loved the legacy more. I folded the letter quietly. My entire childhood, I believed I wasn't enough, that I was too quiet, too strange, too different. But I was never the broken one. I was just the inconvenient truth. I knew what I had to do next. Not revenge, not even justice, just clarity. The world deserved to know what Preston Holdings had been built on. So did every investor, every employee, every shareholder still in the dark. And most importantly, so did I. Called Harold. We met at a quiet restaurant under an alias, booking Marlowe, my childhood dog's name. He looked older than I remembered, weary, but his eyes lit up when I slid the letter across the table. He read it, word by word, paused, and nodded slowly. "I knew it," he muttered. "I just couldn't prove it back then." He pulled out a flash drive. "Everything's on here. The old logs, the identity files, even the back-channel emails Ethan used when he was impersonating you." My chest felt tight. "You've kept this all these years?" He nodded. "I knew someday you'd come for the truth. You always were the smart one." With the evidence in hand, I did what Ethan never imagined. I didn't hide it. I uploaded it to an open-source archive, timestamped every document, attached the letter, and filed a formal report to federal regulators, but not under my name. Under his, Ethan Preston. Let the system track his lies for once. The story made headlines the next morning, not from a tabloid, but from the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "Sister of Disgraced Heir Releases Archive Exposing Preston Empire Fraud." The subheader, "A legacy built on deception comes undone by the one it tried to erase." Ethan tried to respond with a press statement. claimed it was a forgery, that I had manufactured the letter, that Harold had grudges. But the signatures matched. The files were real, the regulators knew it, and so did the world. 2 weeks later, Preston Holdings' stock collapsed. A class action lawsuit followed. Then came the subpoenas, and Ethan? He disappeared, vanished off the grid. No social media, no address, no appearances. But I knew he'd show up again. He always did, because men like him don't go quietly, they burn. Still, I didn't chase him. I had something more important to build. I started a new initiative under Second Light, Inheritance Unwritten, a program helping disinherited children, especially daughters, start businesses, access therapy, and tell their stories. Within a month, over 10,000 applicants applied, and just like that, a new kind of legacy began. But just when I thought that part of my life was finally over, I got an alert on my phone, a security ping from my old family estate account. Someone had logged in, not from the US, from Switzerland. I clicked open the IP address, and what I saw froze my blood. The account name, Preston Vault Emergency Backup, and the last login user, Clara, JPMY name, again. I never realized how far deep my parents' betrayal went until that night. I couldn't sleep. I was pacing the floor of my small studio apartment, replaying every moment of the will reading like it was a horror film stuck on loop. $10 million. And I got nothing. Not even a photo album. Not a letter. Nothing that acknowledged my existence. It wasn't even about the money at this point. It was the blatant erasure of me, the daughter who had spent years nursing my mom through her illness, who helped pay off my parents' mortgage with my savings, who gave up trips and luxuries to keep the family afloat. And still, they cast me aside. I decided I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to dig. First, I started with my brother Noah's business, because I knew, despite the wealth they were flaunting at that will reading, Noah wasn't always that successful. Something didn't add up. I called up Bethany, his old assistant from years ago. She used to message me about how stressed he made her. After some awkward catching up, I casually asked, "Do you remember when Noah started his first tech company? Didn't Dad invest heavily?" She sighed. "Oh yeah. And not just invest. Your dad actually took a second mortgage out on the house to get him that seed money. Noah never mentioned it to you." My heart dropped. My inheritance, everything our parents saved, everything we were supposed to share, was leveraged to build Noah's business. I was never even given the choice. I thanked Bethany and hung up, my hands trembling. So they'd used family money to boost my brother, and then acted like it was his genius alone that created that empire? That was lie number 1. Then came lie number 2. I checked the deed of the lake house, our childhood vacation home. It had been in the family for decades, and I always assumed it would be shared between us. But it was recently sold, according to the county records. Sold to an LLC that, with a little research, I discovered was owned by Noah. He bought it through a shell company, quietly. Months before the will reading. So my brother knew what the will said, probably helped write it, probably even encouraged it. I wasn't angry anymore. I was fire. I went through our family group chat just to torture myself, and noticed something else strange. My parents hadn't messaged me since last Christmas, but they had been messaging Noah nearly every week. I scrolled and scrolled until I saw it, a photo of my dad and Noah standing on a yacht. The caption, "Celebrating the final trust transfer. Proud of you, son. Trust transfer." That's when it hit me. The inheritance didn't just come from the will reading. My parents had been quietly moving all the family asset stocks, real estate, bonds into a trust. A trust that Noah controlled. They'd been bleeding the estate dry before Mom even died. And all while I was being kept in the dark, I needed proof. I needed someone who could help me fight back. As I called Aunt Rita. Aunt Rita was my mom's younger sister. She'd been estranged from the family ever since she refused to lend Dad money years ago. But she always liked me. In fact, she was the only adult who ever told me I was smart and kind. When I told her everything, her voice got cold. I knew your father was greedy, but this is another level. She offered to introduce me to a friend of hers, one who specialized in estate fraud and elder financial abuse. That phrase hit me like lightning. Elder financial abuse? I asked. Yes, she said. Transferring your mother's assets into a trust while she was sick, possibly without her full understanding. That's textbook abuse. And if your name was originally on those documents and then removed, you might have a legal case. Suddenly, I felt oxygen in my lungs again. Hope. Possibility. The next day, I met with her lawyer friend Daniel, who told me exactly what I needed to gather. Old copies of my parents' will, any emails or text referencing asset transfers, financial records showing movement of funds, my mother's medical records during the transfer period. He spent the next 2 weeks going full private investigator. I pulled emails from old backups, requested medical files from the clinic where MOM had been treated, and hacked into the cloud account my MOM used to store her scanned paperwork. That's where I hit gold, a copy of her original will from 6 years ago. I opened the PDF and scrolled quickly. My estate shall be divided equally between my 2 children, Eleanor and Noah. Boom. There it was. Proof that something had changed. That it wasn't always meant to be this way. When I brought everything to Daniel, he leaned back in his chair, whistling. This isn't just a civil case. This could be criminal. Your father and brother may have manipulated your mother's finances while she was under duress or medicated. If a judge agrees, you could blow this wide open. Do I have a real shot? I asked. He nodded slowly. Yes, but it's going to get ugly. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Good. I'm ready for ugly. I never realized how deep the scars of betrayal ran until I found myself pacing outside the law firm building with the file in my hand, heart thudding with the weight of a truth too big to hold alone. The folder Olivia gave me wasn't just about the will. It was about property transfers, fake trusts, and my father's covert siphoning of inheritance over the past 10 years. 10 years. My name was supposed to be on 2 deeds. One was the lake house my grandmother promised me. The second was our grandfather's farmland, something that, as per his handwritten will, should have gone to me. He'd written me letters about managing it one day. Those properties were sold to shell companies and transferred to Ryan's LLC. I'd never been meant to have anything. They'd decided that a long time ago, but it wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was fraud. It was theft, and it was going to be exposed. Olivia's team had already begun assembling a timeline and compiling evidence. And the best part, one of the shell companies was still partially in my mother's maiden name. A stupid oversight. A glaring mistake that would unravel everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted to reclaim what was mine, not just the assets, but the dignity they tried to strip away. I moved out of my apartment that weekend. With Olivia's help, I found a cozy sublet near the courthouse downtown. It was small, but it was mine. No judgment in the walls. no disappointment echoing off the floorboards. That Monday, I walked into the courthouse and filed the lawsuit. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, undue influence, elder exploitation, everything. We didn't just sue Ryan, we sued my parents to. It was poetic, in a tragic way. But I had to do it. Not just for me, but to stop them from doing it to anyone else, especially their future grandchildren, if they ever decided to pick favorites again. And of course, Ryan fought back. He laughed at first. "You don't have the money to keep up," he said over text. "You'll burn out in 3 months." I didn't reply, but Olivia did. She filed a temporary injunction freezing the assets connected to the disputed trusts. That included the farmland, the family vacation home, and $1.2 million from one of Ryan's business accounts. Now he wasn't laughing. He was calling and begging. I didn't pick up, but I did record the voicemail he left. "You have no idea what you're doing, you little girl. You're destroying the family name." Wasn't that the same name they tried to bury me under? The case dragged on for months. There were depositions, subpoenas, and a parade of family secrets spilled like oil on a slick floor. I had to relive every insult, every time they made me feel like less. My mom tried calling once. She said, "Honey, let's not air our laundry like this. We're family." And for the first time in my life, I said back, "No, Mom. We were only family when I was blind." Click. The press caught on. Aries left out of Will Sue's parents and golden child brother made for good headlines, but behind the scenes, it was gutting. Some nights, I cried until my eyes ached. I second-guessed myself. I wondered if I was just being bitter, vengeful, too emotional. Maybe they were right, maybe I did expect too much. And then I'd reread Granddad's letters. He'd signed each one. "To my girl who sees through the noise, keep building." I held on to those words like lifelines, and quietly, piece by piece, I started building my life. During the legal battles, I started a side business in estate planning awareness webinars, speaking gigs, even short social media videos explaining the risks of inheritance fraud. Apparently, people really needed this info. My inbox blew up. A year into the lawsuit, I launched a platform to help young people understand wills, trusts, and inheritance law. I called it Claim What's Yours. It grew faster than I expected. Investors started calling. I began seeing articles about my platform pop up on LinkedIn and Forbes under titles like "The Unexpected Heiress Leading the Next Generation of Estate Reform." The irony? I wasn't an heiress, not yet, but I would be something more unstoppable. It was exactly 16 months, 3 subpoenas, and 2 mediation hearings later when I walked back into that same firm's conference room. Only this time, I wasn't the broken girl who sat stunned while her family handed her betrayal wrapped in a velvet folder. I was the plaintiff, the fighter, the one they underestimated. Ryan sat at the head of the table again, but his expression had changed. His smug grin was gone, replaced by the tight, anxious twitch of someone who had been caught red-handed and was still hoping for a miracle. Mom and Dad sat stiffly next to him, their lawyer whispering hurriedly. Olivia sat beside me, calm and composed, flipping through her notes. Across the table was a federal judge and a retired mediator who had flown in just for this private settlement meeting. We were only here because Ryan had begged to avoid a full trial. Everything had turned. Turns out, Olivia's team had uncovered not only misappropriation of assets, but actual tax evasion. Shell corporations created to launder family money, and shifted into accounts that wouldn't raise flags, but they had. And the IRS had taken notice. My parents thought they were being smart. What they were was sloppy and greedy. Ryan looked up at me during a break and said, "You really want to destroy everything over some stupid farmland and a house no one uses?" I leaned forward, calm and clear. "It's not about the land. It's about the lie. And the fact that you thought I'd never figure it out." He scoffed. "You were always the dramatic one. And you," I said with a smile, "were always too arrogant to read the fine print." Because here was the best part: thanks to Olivia's sharp negotiation and the exposure of multiple fraudulent transactions, we weren't just walking away with what was mine, we were walking away with more. The final agreement came in a thick, bound settlement document. Ryan had to return $5 million in misappropriated funds. He was forced to relinquish ownership of the farmland and the lake house, both of which would revert to me as per my grandfather's original will. And the best part, my parents, rather than face federal charges for aiding and abetting tax fraud, agreed to sign over 2 additional properties as restitution. I didn't just reclaim my inheritance, I tripled it. But I didn't tell anyone right away, not because I wanted to be petty, but because I wanted peace. Some things are better lived than announced. I moved into the lake house first. It needed repairs, but it was the most beautiful quiet I'd ever known. The wind off the water felt like absolution. Every creaky floorboard, every dust-covered shelf, it all felt like mine, not stolen, not handed down with resentment, mine, eventually. The family tried reaching out. Ryan sent me an email, short and passive-aggressive. "Hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." I didn't reply. MOM mailed a handwritten note. "I never imagined it would go this far. We just thought Ryan needed it more. You always had your own way. We didn't mean to hurt you." I left the letter in a drawer I never opened again. And my dad, he never said a word, not one. But that was okay, because one night, as I stood on the lake house porch sipping wine, Olivia joined me with 2 glasses and said, "You did something most people can't. You walked through fire. And you built something from the ashes." I laughed through the tears. "You think I built something?" She raised her glass. "You're building something bigger than any trust fund, any estate. You've built power." And it was true. Claim. What's yours was now a national platform. I had partnerships with legal startups and was planning my first book. And best of all, I was free from needing their approval, free from carrying their shame, free from waiting to be chosen, because I'd finally chosen myself. The final chapter of this story isn't about money. It's not about wills or trusts or broken families. It's about reclaiming your life when everything you thought you owned is taken away. I've spent years chasing the truth, years unraveling the threads of lies spun by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and through it all, I discovered something more valuable than any inheritance: my worth. That night on the lake house porch, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I didn't just inherit property. I inherited a legacy of resilience, of courage, of breaking silence. Yes, my brother got $10 million, but I got something money can't buy: respect, freedom, and the power to define my own story. The truth didn't just set me free, it gave me a platform. To help others like me. To speak for those whose voices have been silenced. To prove that no matter how dark the betrayal, you can always rise. And as for my family, some doors close forever, others open when you stop knocking and start building. So if you're listening right now and feeling erased, ignored, or betrayed. Know this: your story matters, your truth matters, and your power is waiting just beneath the surface. Because when they give you nothing, sometimes you have to take everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm Clara, and this is just the beginning.